One of the reasons we brought you on is, the scripture, to a non-literate audience when it was written, it was predominantly meant to be heard, to be felt. We had Tom Boomershine coming on talking about probably most of the scriptures we understand now as read or spoken. They're probably presented or acted in theater because, they would learn to resonate. And he was even talking about how now we hear first with, the ear but the sounds resonate in us differently. Why I brought you on in specific is because I think there's an art being lost, and I call it just painting with sounds, in that when we go through the scripture, we miss some of the nuance artistically because we read it flat or we say it flat. And some of what you're trying to attempt to do is not just so much say the scriptures lyrically, but I think what we're also missing is the classical piece you're bringing into that to like paint what's actually supposed to be felt or experienced.
Yeah.
When those lyrics are being said. So you're attempting to capture that mind and the affections at the same time. I wonder if you could speak to this a little bit about how you go about that, because I think it's something we may miss. And in modern music, I find a lot of times that the music isn't really sophisticated as the lyric type tends to be, or the lyric might be really sophisticated, but the music does not paint for me the world I'm supposed to enter into. So speak a little bit about how you go about that.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. I think as songwriters, we should strive for there to be a richness in our lyrics and in our music as well. If you look at hymn writers from the past and you compare them to contemporary songwriters, like myself, the hymn writers of the past, like Isaac Watts, Charles Wesley, they would only write the words, the poetry. And so they would think through, just with the verbal side of it, how can I explain this subject matter or maybe this scripture in such a way, and they're only looking at words. And then someone else would take that poem and they would come alongside and they say, hey, that's a great poem. It's a great expression of the heart of Christianity. And then they would put that to music. So you had a lyricist and you had a composer, a music composer, and both of those were given a lot of weight. Today, what you find in contemporary songwriting together, even outside the church, is one person does both. And that's me as well, so I'm not condemning that. But what can sometimes happen is I'm mainly a musician and I write lyrics out of necessity. And so I write some music that is catchy, could be good, and then I just throw on something that sounds Christianese type of language. And that's why sometimes you get vague lyrics or you get music that is just or lyrics that are pretty watered down. And so if you do both, if you're both the lyricist and the composer, you have to give a lot of time and consideration to both of those. And so I'm probably a better composer than I'm a lyricist, but I try to do both and try to do both well. My training as a pastor, my experience preaching taught me a lot about taking something and just communicating it clearly. And again, what I was saying, like from 1 Corinthians 14, of it being intelligible and edifying. And all the songs that I write, if they're meant to facilitate Christian worship, then they need to be those two things. And so I don't need to try to be, I have artistic liberty, and that's something I didn't spend time talking about, but I wanted to, is there is artistic liberty there. And that you can go about that in lots of different ways. But yeah, you want to write good music and you want to write good words. Scripture music is deserving of both of those. And even with that John 4 passage of how we worship God in spirit and in truth, what I forgot to say is that music helps us to feel our thoughts and to think our feelings. That's one of the wonderful elements of music. And so you want both of those. If the music is supposed to complement what I'm thinking, then that needs to be strong and powerful. And if the words are supposed to be guiding what I'm feeling, then the words need to be solid and grounded in truth.
Yeah. Speak a little bit into what you called, the artistic license. I think, when we study scripture and how it was interpreted and how he brought it from original language into today, one of the things we talk about in Bible classes is, everything's interpretation from how he brought it from here to here. Yeah, there's a grid, there's parameters, there's things, but there's ways that we have to figure out, okay, how does this word that means something in Greek, bring it into a language where we have, they may have a million meanings for this one word, but we may just have only one word that says this one word. So we lose the nuance. So how do you get into making some of those artistic choices? I'll use an example because this is something our watchers are familiar with, just to kind of house this in what somebody else has already said. I found it interesting that you have Latifah Phelps or Aladis that came on earlier and from Page CXVI, and she talked about writing, after her father had died and they were at their funeral, she sat down, she picked all these minor chords and she started singing, I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. And she started singing it over these minor chords and I've got the joy, joy, joy. And it was very sorrowful and sad. But, when we sing that song, how you artistic license that same lyric, you can make that a peppy dance song and everybody resonates with that. That's how they relate to that art, through the artistic license. And then you can couch it in that sorrowful moment where another facet of joy is highlighted, this turmoil of joy, this joy in sorrow, this paradox. You can highlight it in music and sing the very same lyric, but paint it very differently. And so the same is true, I think, when you're going through the scriptures. How do you kind of make some of those decisions?
Yeah, and that's the hard part about being an artist. I think we can use artistic liberty too much sometimes and think that as an artist, I'm called to be creative, and
Yeah.
well, the church for thousands of years has understood this passage to be one way, and so I'm going to be fresh and bold and put it in a different way. I think with the example you were referring to is certainly appropriate at times. To you, you're able to help people have maybe a deeper sense of what Christian joy is. Joy is not always light and easy. It's that we're called to be joyful even in the midst of trials, and so there's a place for that. But then if I were to do that for a song that I would share with people, you just got to ask the question, how are people going to receive that? Sure, I might have a great
Mm-hmm.
intention
Yep.
behind that, but am I going to then present that song in such a way where an average person who hears your songs just once, maybe just 5 seconds of it, um, how do I then package that in such a way? Because if we're teaching with music, we certainly are, and that's a really great thing to teach with. But yeah, it's being careful with that. I use artistic liberty in my albums to give me a lot of stylistic diversity. Even with Hebrews, what I did is the entire album it has all these recurring moments of sounds from the theater, and so I presented the entire album as if it were the imaginative uh, recreation of, or maybe the expression of a theater play, and then the music is just maybe what it sounds like in a person's mind. So I left it open there, but because I did that, I framed it all in such a way that it's supposed to be imaginative. It's supposed to be quirky and whimsical at times, and that gave me a little bit more room because I knew my listener could pick up on that to be a bit freer at times with my musical decisions. So there's room for
Yeah.
that. I would just guess you got to do it very, very carefully.
Yeah.